It's a shame. We just heard about it as we were walking through the doors of the Oval. They've been fighting for a long time. I just hope it ends very quickly. Well, that detachment, it kind of highlights the long, messy history we're digging into today. We're talking about the flare-up between India and Pakistan, two nuclear powers. It's serious.
It absolutely is. Things have escalated very quickly. It started with just a horrific attack, and now we're seeing major military action. India launched airstrikes, inside Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir.
And this was in response to what? An attack on tourists?
Yes, exactly. An attack targeting tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir just a few weeks ago. And as you'd expect, the sources we have, they paint different pictures, different causes, different consequences. It's complex.
Okay, so that's our job today in this deep dive, right? To try and piece this together. We need to understand what sparked it, what actions both sides have actually taken, the immediate reactions, and crucially, where this might be headed.
Yeah, the potential fallout. We'll look at the initial attack itself, India's military response, Operation Sindoor. They called it the diplomatic tit-for-tat.
And the bigger risks.
Yeah.
Escalation, the nuclear angle.
Definitely. And the water issue, the Indus Waters Treaty. Plus the economic side of things, even how the media might be, playing a role.
Right. The goal here is really to give you a clear, solid understanding of a situation that's, well, it's moving fast and it's got a lot of layers.
We'll stick to what our sources tell us, try to connect the dots for you.
Okay, let's start with the trigger. The attack near Pahalgam, Indian-administered Kashmir. That was April 22nd, 2025. What happened?
Yeah, it was grim. Reports say armed gunmen opened fire, killed 26 people, mostly Indian tourists, and some accounts, some eyewitnesses suggested Hindu men were specifically targeted, which is obviously very concerning.
And who took responsibility?
Initially, yes, a group called the Resistance Front, or TRF. Now, Indian officials, they link TRF directly to Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Pakistan-based group.
But they claimed it and then, what, took it back?
Exactly. They later denied it. Claimed it was some kind of cyber breach, an attempt to malign the Kashmiri resistance was their phrasing.
That's odd. Claiming responsibility, then denying it? What's the thinking there? Maybe just sowing confusion?
That's very possible. It certainly muddies the waters, doesn't it? Makes it harder to definitively assign blame, complicates the narrative internationally, could be misdirection, could be internal disagreement, or maybe, like you said, just part of an information war. Hard to know for sure.
So, despite that denial, what's India saying officially? Who do they point the finger at?
India's position is unequivocal. They blame Pakistan for backing the militants, full stop. They talk about having credible leads, technical intelligence, survivor accounts, other evidence. They say it all points to terrorists based in Pakistan.
No ambiguity there. And Pakistan's response?
A strong denial. They called India's accusations frivolous, devoid of rationality. They insist their support for Kashmiris opposing Indian rule is only ever diplomatic and moral, nothing more.
And they even called for an investigation.
Yes, a neutral one. They actually suggested bringing China in to support it, presumably to add weight or neutrality from their perspective.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Attack, accusations, denials. Then comes India's response. Operation Sindoor, May 6th. What did that involve?
Operation Sindoor involved missile strikes. India says they targeted 9 locations inside Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. They described it officially as a focused and non-escalatory response. That phrasing is key.
Focused on what, specifically?
Infrastructure, they said, linked to Lashkar-e-Taiba and another group, Jaish-e-Mohammed. The groups India holds responsible for that Pahalgam attack. And they made a point of saying no Pakistani military facilities were hit, and they tried to avoid civilian casualties. That was the official line.
But Pakistan tells a different story.
A very different story. They confirmed strikes, but only on 6 locations, not 9. And they reported casualties. 8 people killed, 38 injured.
Which is quite different from India implying minimal or no casualties.
Exactly. And Pakistan's military spokesperson came out saying they'd respond at a time and place of its choosing. The Prime Minister backed that up.
Calling it an act of war.
Yes, he used those exact words, promised a robust response. And we saw practical measures, too. Pakistan reportedly shut its airspace for 48 hours straight after.
These conflicting accounts, especially on casualties, it highlights how hard it is to get clear facts in these situations, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's the classic fog of war, compounded by, let's be honest, deliberate information management on both sides. Each country is trying to control the narrative, both for its domestic audience and internationally. Verifying anything independently becomes incredibly difficult.
And this dispute over what was actually hit. India says terror camps, Pakistan says civilian areas and invited media in.
That's right. Pakistan is actively trying to counter India's narrative by saying, come and see for yourselves. They want to show the international community that civilian sites were damaged. It's a PR battle alongside the military actions.
Okay, so after the strikes, the diplomatic fallout started almost immediately. What were the big moves from India?
Quite a few. First, the big one, suspending the Indus Waters Treaty. We'll probably need to unpack that more later.
Yeah, definitely. What else?
They closed the main border crossing, the Wagah-Atari border, canceled visas for Pakistani nationals, initially a specific regional scheme, but then brought into almost everyone.
Almost everyone.
Yeah. There was an exception for long-term visas held by Hindu Pakistanis. They also pulled military advisors from their high commission in Islamabad and hinted more embassy staff might be cut.
A real diplomatic freeze then. And Pakistan. Did they just mirror these actions?
Pretty much, yeah. Tit for tat. Closed their side of the border crossing, canceled visas for Indians, though they made an exception for Sikh pilgrims going to Kartarpur Sahib. They also recalled their military advisors from Delhi, signaled embassy staff reductions, and crucially, closed their airspace to Indian Airlines. Suspended all trade, which was tiny anyway, but symbolically important. And perhaps most significantly, they put all bilateral agreements with India in abeyance.
In abeyance, meaning on hold, inactive. What does that include? The Simla Agreement.
Exactly. Suspended, inactive. And yes, that includes the Simla Agreement from '72. That agreement laid out principles for peaceful dispute resolution, respecting the line of control in Kashmir. Putting that on ice is a major step backward for diplomatic channels. Shows how serious things are.
Wow. So how did the rest of the world react? The US, UN, others?
Generally, with a lot of concern and calls for calm, the U.S. State Department initially said they were closely monitoring, pretty standard diplomatic language. Later, Secretary of State Rubio urged de-escalation, sort of echoing Trump's hope for a quick end.
And the UN?
The Secretary General, Guterres, he apparently spoke with both sides, stressed the need to avoid a confrontation that could result in tragic consequences, you know, trying to pull them back from the brink.
Anyone else weighing in?
China and the EU both urged calm and restraint. And there were reports, sort of behind the scenes, that Iran and Saudi Arabia were trying to mediate, trying to help diffuse things.
It's good some are trying to mediate, but this escalation feels particularly dangerous given the history.
It absolutely is. You have to remember, India and Pakistan have fought 4 conventional wars since 1947. 3 of those were primarily over Kashmir.
So the potential for miscalculation is always there.
Always. And we saw military posturing even before these latest strikes happened.
Right, you mentioned that earlier, drills and troop movements.
Yes, reports of Indian military exercises and buildups near the line of control. And just days before India's operation, on May 3rd, Pakistan test-fired ballistic missiles.
Not exactly calming signals.
Not at all. It creates a climate of heightened tension where any spark could ignite something much bigger.
And looming over all of this, the nuclear weapons.
That's the elephant in the room, always. Both are nuclear states. It raises the stakes incredibly high. Analysts see parallels to 2019, the Balakot strikes, but they also note this time India used precision missiles. That might signal an evolution, perhaps a raising of the ante in their strategic posture.
And Pakistan's promise of a strong response that just keeps the cycle going, potentially.
Precisely. It increases the risk of this tit-for-tat escalating spiral, which, given the nuclear mention, is genuinely frightening.
Let's circle back to the Indus Waters Treaty. You said India suspended it. Can you explain what that treaty is and why suspending it is such a big deal?
Sure. The IWT, it's from 1960, brokered by the World Bank. It basically divides the waters of the Indus River system. India gets control over the 3 eastern rivers, Beas, Ravi, Sutlej. Pakistan gets the 3 western rivers, Indus, Chenab, Jhelum. There are rules about usage, too.
So it's been a cornerstone of water management for decades.
For over 60 years, yes. It's survived multiple wars, so India unilaterally suspending it, that's huge. Pakistan sees guaranteed water flow as essential, almost existential.
And Pakistan's reaction was strong, you mentioned.
Very strong. They argued the treaty has no clause for unilateral suspension, and they've explicitly said any Indian attempt to actually stop or divert water flow would be seen as an act of war.
An act of war over water.
That's their stance. Now, the immediate impact of suspension might just be halting data sharing, things like that, but the long-term threat.
What's the long-term threat? India building dams.
That's the concern for Pakistan, that India could use the suspension as a pretext to build infrastructure on the western rivers that could restrict water flowing downstream into Pakistan. That would have potentially catastrophic effects on Pakistan's agriculture, its economy, its stability. So the stakes around water are enormous.
Let's shift to the economy then. Moody's did an analysis. What are their main takeaways, especially for Pakistan?
Moody's is quite worried about Pakistan. They warn that if these tensions drag on, it could seriously hurt Pakistan's economy, specifically making it harder to get external financing, putting more pressure on their foreign currency reserves, which are already low.
So it could derail their economic recovery efforts.
It could set back progress on stabilizing their economy and getting their finances in order, yes. That's the core risk Moody's sees for Pakistan.
And for India, what's the expected economic impact?
Much more limited, according to Moody's. Direct economic impact. Minimal. Why? Because trade between them is already so small. Less than 0.5% of India's exports went to Pakistan last year.
But there are indirect effects.
Potentially. Moody's notes that if tensions stay high, India might increase its defense spending. And that could strain India's own budget and maybe slow down their efforts to reduce their fiscal deficit. It's interesting, though, Moody's baseline already kind of assumes periodic flare-ups like this. They just operate on the assumption it won't boil over into a full-scale war.
Let's hope they're right on that. Now, the media's role. We saw in 2019 how media narratives seemed to fan the flames initially. What are we seeing now, or what can we anticipate based on that history?
That's a really important angle. Looking back at the Pulma-Balakot crisis in 2019, the media on both sides largely amplified nationalist rhetoric, echoed the government line. In India, it arguably built consensus for retaliation. In Pakistan, it reinforced denial of involvement, so potentially escalatory early on.
But did it shift later?
It did seem to shift after the immediate retaliation and significantly after Pakistan captured an Indian pilot. Then the narrative seemed to move towards projecting, victory and stability, which might have actually helped de-escalation, weirdly enough. Gave both governments space to sort of claim success and step back without losing face.
So the media can be both escalatory and de-escalatory, depending on the government's needs, perhaps.
That seems plausible, especially given reports of increased government influence over media in both countries. The media might just follow the government's lead, push for action when needed, help calm things down when needed.
But does that constant nationalism in media coverage have a longer-term effect?
It likely does. It can really entrench those nationalist feelings in the public, which might then demand stronger action in the next crisis. It potentially makes future de-escalation harder.
Okay, finally, we have to address the worst-case scenario. Nuclear conflict. There's that Rutgers University analysis looking at a hypothetical 2025 scenario. It's chilling.
It is deeply disturbing. It lays out a scenario plausible, they argue, starting with a terrorist attack maybe on India's parliament. That leads to mobilization, border clashes escalating, and then the nightmare. Pakistan potentially using tactical nuclear weapons first to stop a conventional Indian advance.
Which then triggers
a full-scale nuclear exchange.
Yeah, the human cost they estimate. It's hard to even grasp.
The numbers are staggering. 50 to 125 million immediate deaths. It depends on the size of the weapons used, 15 kilotons up to 100. Major cities wiped out. Millions more injured. Infrastructure gone.
And the impact wouldn't stop at the border, right? Global consequences.
Far from it. The study talks about the smoke. Massive amounts of black carbon smoke from the burning cities getting thrown up into the stratosphere. We're talking 16 to maybe 37 teragrams. That smoke would block sunlight, causing global cooling, a nuclear winter or something close to it. Reduced rainfall. For years.
Which means famine.
Catastrophic failure of agriculture worldwide. Potential famine affecting billions, literally billions of people. Plus long-term damage to oceans, land ecosystems, the ozone layer letting in more UV radiation. It's apocalyptic, frankly. Even a regional nuclear war like this would be a global humanitarian and environmental disaster of unimaginable scale.
It just hammers home why avoiding conflict is so absolutely critical.
It really does. The conclusion is stark. These weapons must be limited, ultimately eliminated. The risk is just too great.
Okay, so trying to pull all this together, it's a lot. What are the absolute key takeaways we need to hold on to from this deep dive?
Right. I think first, India's strikes, Operation Sindoor, were framed as a direct response to that deadly Pahalgam attack, which India firmly blames on Pakistan-backed groups. That's the core trigger. Second, Both sides reacted strongly, militarily, diplomatically shutting borders, suspending visas, recalling advisors. It's a significant breakdown.
And the Indus Waters Treaty suspension, that feels like a major escalation point.
Huge. It brings in this whole other dimension of conflict over vital resources. Add to that the economic pressure, especially on Pakistan, according to Moody's, and overlying everything is the history. Decades of conflict, mistrust, and now this very real risk of further escalation, possibly even spiraling towards that horrifying nuclear scenario we just discussed. It's a dangerous mix. Historical tensions, current grievances, security fears, economic worries, and now water politics all feeding into each other.
It really is. Which leaves us with a pretty heavy final thought for everyone listening, doesn't it? Given this long history, the nuclear weapons, the potential for media to inflame things, how do you manage these tensions? How can future crises be navigated to avoid the absolute worst? And what role can the international community realistically play? Can they effectively push for de-escalation, for dialogue? It's not just about India and Pakistan anymore, is it? The implications are truly global, something to really mull over.